I once sold a part of my soul for just enough to afford 3 rounds of chemotherapy. The Harley-Davidson shop sat tucked between 2 aging buildings near the town's train station. The sign was faded, the glass door was dusty, and the storefront was nothing special. But to Evan Matthews, that place was like a temple. Every Saturday morning at exactly 7:10, he would ride his bicycle there, stop at the same familiar spot in front of the glass, and stand in silence. He didn't need to touch the bike. He just looked, a long, deep look, never a passing glance. That matte black Iron 8 83 wasn't a vehicle. It was a symbol, the physical embodiment of the one thing he had ever wanted for himself. Evan lost his parents when he was 8. A car crash, they said, a head-on collision on the highway as the family returned from a fall festival. Evan wasn't in the car that day because he'd had a fever. When the police came with the news, his grandmother, a small woman with silver hair and a worn sweater, stood quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just gently pulled Evan close, held him tight, and whispered, "You don't have anyone else but me now, but I still have you. We still have each other." They lived in a small wooden house at the end of Magnolia Street. No one in that neighborhood was wealthy, but everything was clean, orderly, and full of perseverance. She taught Evan how to bake when he was 10, how to hand wash clothes when the machine broke, and reminded him over and over, never ask life to be easy, just don't let it make you careless. He grew up with unspoken rules that no one wrote down. Don't complain, don't blame others, and always take responsibility for every dollar you earn. Evan wasn't a standout kid. He didn't play sports, didn't rebel, wasn't great at small talk, but he observed things others missed, like the sound of tires sliding gently on wet pavement, or how headlights blurred softly through the morning mist. He loved to feel a wind on his face when he pedaled fast, and then one day, he saw his first Harley. It was a stranger, an old veteran, in a leather jacket, heavy boots, and sad eyes, riding past with an engine rumble that felt like it came from the ground itself. Evan turned to watch him for a long time, and for the first time in his life, he didn't just think, "I like that." He thought, "I want that." He wanted it with an instinctive, deep, unwavering desire. At 16, Evan began working part-time jobs. Morning shifts at the bakery, washing dishes, mopping floors, collecting leftover pastries. In the afternoon, he delivered newspapers or helped at the library. In the summer, he worked in warehouses. The heat was brutal. His hands blistered. Sweat ran down his back, but he never missed a shift. Every time he got paid, he divided it immediately. 1 part for tuition, 1 part for grandma's medicine, the rest for the Harley Fund. No one knew about the fund. No one was allowed to touch it. It was never used just for now. Every dollar in that fund was a skipped lunch, a night fallen asleep over textbooks, a sore back from lifting too much, a New Year's without gifts, a winter with no new coat. He had chances to go out, go camping, go on dates, but he turned them all down. "You think this isn't hard?" Evan once asked a friend who would tease him. Then he said nothing more, answering with action, taking a night shift right after his final exams. Friends called him weird. Professors said he lacked social skills. They weren't wrong, but no one knew he lived his whole life in a house with no father's laughter, no mother's embrace. Just a frail old woman who asked softly every night, "Did you eat enough?" And Evan always lied, "Yes, I did," while his stomach growled with hunger. In his second year of college, Evan began visiting the Harley shop every week. At first, the staff thought he was just wasting time. But after a few months, they got used to the quiet persistence. Someone once joked, "You've been staring at it for a year. Neck not sore?" Evan simply shrugged. "I'm not looking at the bike. I'm looking at who I was before I gave up." He researched every Iron 8 83 model, memorized specs, prices, maintenance tips. He even wrote a 3-page financial plan listing every income source, every expense, and each milestone he needed to hit. Some found it amusing. But to Evan, it was a map to freedom. By the end of his junior year, Evan had saved enough, not a fortune to most, but the compressed essence of a youth spent without indulgence. That morning, he didn't tell anyone. He just wore a white shirt, old jeans, and arrived at the shop earlier than usual. The owner, a silver-haired, tattooed Italian biker, watched as Evan counted every bill. No word was spoken, just the rustling of money and the ticking of the clock. Finally, the man nodded, quietly handed over the key and said softly, "You're the first person to buy this bike with pure patience." Evan took the key with both hands. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He stepped outside, placed his hand on the bike like he was touching his own reflection, not perfect, not polished, but real and dependable. On the first morning after getting the bike, Evan skipped breakfast. He woke up earlier than usual and opened garage door as if stepping into a personal ritual. Under the cover, the Harley sat in silence, not just cloaked in 3 years of dust, but wrapped in a quiet faith he had never spoken out loud. He placed his hand on the handlebars, cold, rigid, yet pulsing with a life of its own. That sensation made Evan feel like he was touching something alive, truly alive, not just metal but a silent affirmation, "You've earned this." When the engine roared to life, that first growl sent a tremor through his chest, not because of the sound, but because it confirmed something. The bike was real, and it had been waiting for him. Evan didn't say a word. He simply took a deep breath and twisted the throttle gently, as if unlocking a secret he'd kept buried for half his life. The road through the old neighborhood had never looked more beautiful. The wind whipped against his face, sharp but clarifying. The engine's rumble mingled a rush of air, composing the only song that could drown out years of living for someone else. He rode with no destination, no Google Maps, no endpoint, just the road. Because in that moment, he wasn't the boy raised by his grandmother. He wasn't the broke student washing dishes past midnight. He was the only person who truly knew what it felt like to win, without needing applause. The wind slipped through his jacket, brushed against his arms, then vanished. At one curve, Evan closed his eyes for half a second, letting his body lean with the bike, as if every muscle understood. This was freedom, irreplaceable, unreplicable. When he stopped at the top of a hill on the town's edge, overlooking the quiet little streets below, Evan cut the engine. Silence returned, leaving only the sound of his heartbeat. His hands still gripped the bars, but his chest felt weightless. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But in his eyes, something had just let go, something that had been held in far too long. He sat there for 10 more minutes, as if afraid to move, worried he'd shatter the feeling he'd just found. And when he finally turned back, Evan didn't rev the engine. He rode slowly, very slowly, as if committing every inch of the road to memory, each second of living fully by his own choice. 3 weeks passed like wind slipping through a helmet visor. Evan still woke up early, still rode his bike every Sunday morning, and still kept that quiet smile on his face the whole ride home. The Harley wasn't just a reward. It was a confirmation. Some dreams, if held on to enough resolve, will come true. No miracles required. But then, one early morning in April, Evan noticed something odd. His grandmother didn't come down to the kitchen like she always did. He knocked on her door and found her sitting by the window, hair unbrushed, eyes staring far into the distance. When he asked if she was okay, she smiled and said, "It's such a beautiful day," then looked up at Evan as if trying to recognize his face, just to be sure. The next day, she put salt in her tea instead of sugar. Evan laughed, but she didn't. She fell silent for a moment, then stared at her hands as if wondering whether they still belonged to her, whether they could still be trusted. Evan didn't say anything, but something tightened in his chest, not because of the tea, but because it was the first time he saw her slowing down. She started sleeping more during the day. One afternoon, she paused mid-bite on her second spoonful of food, blinking softly, as if she'd forgotten what she was doing. Evan pretended not to notice. But that night, He lay awake in his room, eyes wide open, ears straining to catch every sound from the room next door. A week later, she dropped a plate in the kitchen, not because she tripped. Her hand had simply let go, as if the signal between brain and muscle had disappeared. The porcelain shattered across the floor, a shard nicking her ankle. Evan rushed to her side, helped her up, but she didn't cry out in pain. She just stared at the blood and murmured, "That's strange." I didn't feel anything. That evening, Evan didn't open the garage. The bike remained there, silent beneath its thin cover. He made her tea, brought it upstairs, and sat beside her bed, like the 8-year-old boy he once was, his hand gripping the arm of the chair until his knuckles turned white. She had once been the only reason he didn't fall apart. Now, she was slowly dissolving into something unnamed and unreachable. No one warns you when a loved one begins to fade. No one draws a line where the fatigue begins. But Evan knew. The bike outside, the dream he'd just touched, was beginning to feel like a luxury he might no longer afford. 2 days after the plate shattered, Evan took his grandmother to the doctor. It started as a routine neurological checkup, but the doctor soon recommended blood tests and an MRI. "It's nothing serious, just to be sure," he said. But Evan heard the pause in his voice, the kind people use when they're not telling the whole truth. The results didn't come right away. A week later, in the middle of the class, Evan got a call from the hospital. In a white room, the doctor got straight to the point. Pancreatic tumor. Late stage. Treatable to prolong life. Not curable. Evan stood still. His throat felt like it was wrapped in thick cloth. He held the result paper in his hand, but his vision blurred. The doctor asked if he needed a financial counselor. He shook his head. He just wanted to leave. On the ride home, he didn't say a word. His grandmother sat quietly in the back of the bus, dozing off, her hand gently holding the folder. Evan looked at that hand, thinner now, veins visible, and knew he was counting the days left with the only person who'd always been there. That night, he opened the closet and pulled out an old envelope labeled Harley, only if truly necessary. He had never imagined he'd touch it again, but right then, nothing else seemed worth keeping. The bike was still in the garage. Evan pulled the cover off. His hands trembled as they touched the handlebars. He didn't look at it long, just opened the door, wheeled it out, and called the shop owner. "Money trouble?" the man asked, voice free of judgment. Evan paused. "My grandmother's sick. I need treatment money. I need to sell it. Fast." The man sighed, didn't say much. "Bring it over. I'll take a look." They hung up. Evan stood in the yard a few minutes longer, looking at the bike like it was a friend he was about to betray. The road to the shop was familiar, but this time, it wasn't a ride toward freedom. Every turn of the wheel felt like counting backward through the days he'd lived for himself. The wind still blew cool, but it didn't soothe. It cut his cheeks, colder than any real winter. When he arrived, the shop owner said nothing. He looked at the bike, then at Evan, then down at the table. "You sure? You've only ridden about 200 miles. Evan didn't answer. He just placed the keys on the wooden surface, as gently as if laying down his own heart. "No need to check it. The bike's still new. I'll pay you the original price." He took the keys. No paperwork, no signatures. Just two men understanding each other in the weight of silence. Evan didn't take the bus home. He walked. The wind was strong. The sky was gray, and on a long city street, he was a small figure moving quietly forward, with nothing left in his hands but a decision no one should ever have to make at 21. 3 months after selling the bike, there was no sharp pain, no screaming, no emergency room in the middle of the night. She simply went to sleep and never woke up again. That morning, Evan made tea like he always did, then brought it up to her room. She was lying on her side, pillow propped up, blanket covering half her body, one hand resting on her chest. He called her once, then again, and slowly stepped closer. Her face was peaceful, cold, but not contorted, as if she had just gone out for a walk and would be back soon. On the table beside her was a small note, the handwriting shaky. "Thank you for staying. Don't stop now, okay?" Evan didn't cry. He simply sat in the chair beside the bed, placed his hand over hers. Cold, so cold. He lowered his head, forehead gently touching her hand, just like when he was little, and she'd rest her palm on his forehead during a fever. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not even sure what he was apologizing for not being able to save her, or for once having dreamed of something else. The funeral took place on a windless morning. There weren't many people, no lavish flower arrangements. Evan personally chose a photo of her smiling and wrote the short epitaph himself on the stone, "The only one who never left me." 3 days later, he returned to school. No one asked too many questions. They knew Evan had just lost the last family member he had, but they also knew he didn't want pity. He sat back at his desk, buried his face in textbooks, as if he'd never been away. Mornings were for studying, afternoons for part-time work, evenings for online tutoring. Sometimes he skipped dinner entirely, or just drank a cup of cold coffee. No one reminded him. No one scolded him. No one left food waiting on the table. Every rhythm of life was self-made, operated like a flawless machine. When exhaustion hit hardest, he would copy old chemistry formulas by hand. Symbols, reactions, carbon chains. Those were the only things that stayed consistent in a world that had lost its structure. He did research, submitted papers, attended conferences, received scholarships, all quietly. He never posted about his grief, never once complained. But night was different. When the lights went out, when the voices faded, when there was nothing left to do, Evan felt completely hollow. Some nights, he would turn on the kitchen light at 2 a.m. just to stand and stare at the chair where she used to sit. The wooden chair was still there, empty, silent, cold as steel. He imagined her voice asking if he was hungry, but there was only the hum of the refrigerator and a mug left unwashed since morning. He'd open his laptop, scroll through photos of the Harley. Every angle, every scratch, every warranty slip still saved. But it was a bike that no longer belonged to him, just like the carefree years that died the day she did. Once, during a heavy rainstorm, the power went out. Evan sat alone in the dark, a research notebook in hand, but he couldn't read a single line. He cried. For the first time, he let himself cry, quietly, with no one to see. Only the sound of rain falling like the shatter of metal. Loneliness isn't about not having someone beside you. It's about having no one left to call home. Evan's life didn't explode like it does in the movies. It moved quietly, just like the way he had walked through grief. 10 years later, people knew him as a calm, reputable applied scientist. He didn't give many speeches. His company, Matthews Molecular, specialized in biocompatible chemical solutions and was headquartered in a modest neighborhood. The sign out front was small, unlit, hand-carved with a single line, "Innovation for Healing." Each year, the Margaret's Fund, the charity he founded, continued sending money to pancreatic cancer patients who couldn't afford treatment. There were no galas, no press releases, no selfies with patients. Only envelopes that arrived right on time, signed simply, E. Matthews. He still lived alone, still stayed up late, still drank weak tea, the way his grandmother used to make it. And he never told anyone about the motorcycle he once sold to buy a few extra months for the woman who raised him. Until one October afternoon, during a field visit in the outskirts of the city, Evan was speaking with family whose child was sick when his eyes suddenly froze. Behind an abandoned house, in a mess of tall grass and tangled vines, lay a rusted motorcycle. It leaned to one side like a discarded piece of evidence from a trial no one had won. The front wheel was half sunken into the earth, its frame coated in red dust. But the left handlebar, scarred by a long blade-shaped scratch, was unmistakable. Evan walked toward it. Each step felt like crossing a tightrope stretch between past and present. He thought he had learned to forget that bike, buried that dream like people bury their childhood notebooks. But the moment he stood in front of it, the entire shell he'd spent 10 years building simply peeled away, without anyone needing to touch it. He knocked on the nearest door. A worn-out woman in her 40s, face gaunt, eyes wary, answered. "The old bike? It's my brother's. He's been in prison for 6 years. I kept it because, I don't know, maybe he'd still want it." Evan kept his voice calm. "I'm its former owner. From 10 years ago." She stared at him. "You want to buy it back?" "Yes." "Not for sale." Evan returned 2 days later. Then again, and again, every time, she gave the same answer. "Not for sale." She wasn't stubborn. In a world where people have lost everything, the last object they cling to often isn't possession. It's a sliver of control. Evan understood that, and he knew, to reclaim your own dream, sometimes you must trade a bit of pride. He left a card. No pressure, no offer, just a single handwritten line. "I once gave it up to save someone I loved. If you agree, I'd like to take it back. Not to ride, but to remember." 3 weeks later, she called. Her voice was hoarse, nearly emotionless. "I don't need the bike, but I need money to transfer my son to another hospital. If you want it, you'll have to pay 3 times what it once sold for." Evan didn't bargain, didn't ask why. He simply replied, "I'll transfer the money today." The day the bike returned to his hands, Evan stood before the Harley for a long time without saying a word. His throat was dry. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but because in this moment, everything he had once tried to forget was now racing back toward him, and he didn't know whether to receive it as someone who had survived or someone who had once died. He wiped off the rust, slowly, without gloves. Every scratch, every bolt, felt like a question left unanswered for 10 years. When he finally sat on the seat, Evan rested his head against the handlebars. He didn't cry, but inside his heart screamed, like a choked engine, trembling, compressed, then finally breaking free. The bike started after 2 attempts. The roar wasn't as strong as it once was, but it was alive. That sound didn't echo like victory. It was more like a hoarse greeting from an old friend everyone thought was dead, still waiting, right where they left you. Evan rode into the sunset. No one watched him go, but for the first time in 10 years, he saw himself again, in the rear-view mirror. Not everything we lose comes back, but sometimes what we were once forced to give up turns out to be the only thing that never gave up on us. Life often demands that we trade away the things we treasure most, not because we're unworthy of them, but because we had no other choice. But if we live with enough steadiness, kindness, and never forget where we started, then some things we thought were lost forever may still be waiting for us at the end of an unexpected road. Evan once gave up the one thing that made him feel like himself, but after all the loss, he found it again, not to run away, but to remind himself that we can still live a full life, even if we've had to cut away a piece of our youth. The greatest lesson didn't lie in the motorcycle, nor in the success. It lay in the quiet refusal to collapse completely, even when there was no one left waiting for him to rise again. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched something within you, even just for a moment, leave a sign, a like, a comment, or share. That's the fuel that keeps this channel going. To tell more stories that are honest, heartfelt, and alive. See you in the next video. And if one day you're forced to let go of something, remember this. If you've loved it deeply enough, it may not be gone forever.